So we approach the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination next month. We want to take a closer look at the civil rights movement today. Where do we stand in the fight for racial equality and economic justice? And where are we headed? My next guests are national civil rights experts at the forefront of this important conversation. I'd like to welcome Terri Lee Freeman, president of the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, and Rashad Robinson, executive director of the online racial justice organization known as Color of Change. Welcome to American Black Journal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So let's start with that prime question. Where are we 50 years after Dr. King was assassinated? Better off, worse off, headed in the right direction, or not?
So I guess I will say that there has been some progress made, but it has not been significant enough. I mean, clearly the legal changes that occurred in the 60s were critical to our progress. But when you look at data around economic factors and where we are now as compared to where we were 50 years ago, in some instances it's worse.
Yeah.
And so in answering the question, where do we go from here, I think the answer has to be forward, we hope.
Yeah.
And it will require us doing it, I think, in a bit of a different way, which I think is why Rashad's work is so critically important as we move forward over the next 50 years.
Those are the next 50 years, right. This is an interesting time to be having this conversation. Given what's going on around the country, I think two things stand out. One is the student movement that seems to be congealing around the question of gun policy in the United States. And then this really strange series of bombings that has been happening in Texas. It reminds of the 60s. It reminds of a more volatile time in our history. And I think the question is, why are we back in that space, right? But then also, how do we navigate it differently so that we're not here again in 50 years?
Yes, I think it really gets us down to these questions of power, right? Not mistaking presence or visibility or awareness for power, but recognizing that power is the ability to change the rules. And I think so much of what we've seen, and especially since the 80s, with the rollbacks of rights and opportunities from 1980 being the height of school integration in this country, we've seen the black and white wealth gap sort of continue to expand since the 80s. And that's all been about a set of rules. Even while we've seen corporate America diversify, we've seen a black president, we've seen Hollywood celebrities, at the macro level, the rules that were put in place largely by big conservative forces supported by major corporations have put communities in harm's way at a macro level. And so what we actually have to do is build the type of powerful campaigns that don't mistake the black faces in high places, which is good, for the actual long-term progress that happens across the community.
Yeah. So talk about how Color of Change is engaging in that work.
So every single day we're hit with all sorts of information from the radio, the television, the internet. And oftentimes, if we don't give someone something to do in that moment, they go back to doing what they were doing before.
Right.
And so what we try to do is pair digital technology with the ability to take clear action. So if you're outraged about something, not just sharing an article, but taking a clear action.
What can I go do?
What can I go do? And was really founded out of that moment in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, where black folks were on their roofs begging for the government to do something and were left to die. And Katrina was about a lot of things: geographic segregation, generational poverty, the impacts of climate and criminal justice, and so many other things. But at the heart of it, no one was nervous about disappointing black people.
Right.
The government,
they weren't.
media, corporations, they were just not nervous. And so that's a question, once again, about power. And so whether it was the campaign that forced Bill O'Reilly or Pat Buchanan or Glenn Beck off the air by going directly after advertisers, mobilizing our members, or forcing corporations to divest from the organization behind voter ID laws and stand your ground laws, or the work we're doing right now to elect reform-minded district attorneys around the country, the most powerful actors in the criminal justice space, to not just be present on the criminal justice moment that we're in, but actually put decision makers in office that are accountable to our community.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's important to recognize that, you know, if we take a historical look at this, one of the most successful episodes of the civil rights movement was Montgomery and the bus boycott. So when people are asked to do something, they do
They'll
it,
go do
and
it,
there is
right?
an impact that we feel. And ultimately, we know what's going to be important is you got to make people feel this in their pockets.
Yeah, right.
That turns
That's what
heads.
matters
That's
in
what
America,
changes
at least,
things.
right?
Yes.
I'm curious. The museum is in Memphis. Probably not terribly far from the Lorraine Motel.
It's actually at the Lorraine
It's at the
Motel.
Lorraine,
Right.
and talk about what this moment sort of reminds
Sure.
for you guys.
Well, you know, we don't need to really rehash what happened on April 4th, 1968. Everybody knows what happened on April 4th, 1968. But what we do need to be reminded of is why King was in Memphis.
Right.
And King was in Memphis because of
sanitation worker
workers.
strike, yeah.
And the fact that 2 gentlemen had been killed because they didn't have a place to go in for shelter, so they took shelter in the garbage truck and they were crushed to death.
Right.
He was there to support them in their fight for humane treatment, more equitable pay, benefits. And it's interesting because we still have 2 of the former sanitation strikers that are working at the sanitation department. 1 is still on a truck.
Yeah.
So that tells you something about the amount
Right.
of progress
What's happened.
that has taken place over 50 years. So it's really important for us to push forward in this year, 2018, that King's message of economic equity should not be lost. And
Right.
it's a message that people don't talk about that King had.
And that's a different message, right? I mean, it's a tougher message to sort of get your arms around.
And it's not the Disneyfied message
Right.
that we
That's
oftentimes hear.
That's right.
Right now at the Supreme Court, there is a case, right, that will basically undo the ability for people to collectively organize
Right.
and
Right.
build unions. The
Right.
Janus case at the Supreme Court right now. And we have that case at the same time while major corporations who are using Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech in their
to sell
commercials
trucks.
to sell trucks while fighting their unions.
Yeah.
To the extent that this gets back to us sort of paying attention to the right set of indicators and building the right type of power, forcing not just our marches at the government, at Donald Trump, but also holding all the other entities accountable that have a deep role in how we get to live every single day.
Yeah, community is not built by government alone.
No,
right?
no, right.
There
It's built by
is
us.
the private sector and there is the independent sector.
Yes.
And it's important that we, frankly, ask each one of these sectors, so what have you done for us lately?
Right,
And how are we going to make it to that next point?
I mean, the question around like images that come into our homes that connect the unwritten rules of our culture. And you think about the fact that as much as people talk about how liberal Hollywood is, America had a black president before we had a black superhero.
Well,
and that is once again a question about the rules and about who makes the decisions and how we need to be challenging at all the sectors in our society if we're going to make the type of change we need.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, important times and important work still to be done on all of these fronts. Thank you both for all the work that you do, and thank you for being here on American Black Journal.